to Houston, to Tulsa, and then to Europe. We lived in Belgium, we lived in Germany, and we lived in England, so many, many places. In 1983, to our delight, Andy joined the US Foreign Service. We trained in Washington, D.C., and then off to our first posting, Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, and then on to Riyadh. It was wonderful to get to know the Islamic culture. We also spent 10 years in Johannesburg in South Africa. All in all, we had 23 moves in 44 years. That's a lot of moves. We lived a hectic but really, really fun life with so many moves. We had a wonderful time, and most of my time was spent taking care of my children, jumping on airplanes because they were in boarding schools all over the world. And entertaining was a huge part of our life too. And that's, I think, where a lot of my drinking began. I worked in Johannesburg. I worked at the United States Information Service as an educational advisor, securing bursaries for Black South African students so they could study at American colleges. And to my delight, I began my career in Radio South Africa for children's programs, and then later on went to work with the BBC in London. I think South Africa was the beginning of the end for me. From then, things really got bad. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world, with lovely vineyards and the most delicious wine, which I think was my downfall. For many years, my husband and children had been telling me that I was drinking too much. Could I please sip and not gulp? I couldn't sip. I'd down the glass, and it was fun to down the glass. I was addicted, and I could not admit it to anyone, not even to myself. Finally, my husband and children talked me into going to treatment at the Betty Ford Center. I went reluctantly and was thrown out for drinking a very short time later. My family by then was desperate with me. They didn't know what to do. I don't know if many of you have heard of interventions, but thanks to Alan Massey, who spoke so beautifully a little while ago, he recommended an intervention for me, and he was very, very happy, took him up on it, and we had this intervention in Palm Springs. My two daughters came from Vermont, my son from Cincinnati, a daughter from England, and my brother from Washington, D.C. I was in severe blackout mode and had major facial disorders. I'd fallen so many times. My face was probably swollen out to here, black and blue. I thought I was going to a family reunion. That's how sick I was, how sad it was for me. And I sat on the floor in a room like this, playing with my grandchildren, playing with their toys, their blocks, while all this was going on around me. So this resulted in my first admission to detox at Willingway Hospital in Statesboro, Georgia. I was there for 6 weeks, but I had no intention of stopping to drink. And I began immediately the second I got to the airport. Because I wasn't an alcoholic. Why shouldn't I have a drink? I was in total denial, which is what Alan mentioned. Denial is something an alcoholic doesn't understand. He knows nothing about denial. Others can see it, but I couldn't see it. My family was so distressed by then, they took me to Maple Leaf Farm in Vermont to detox and to sober up for my grandson's birth at Porter Hospital, who I went to visit, and I fell asleep on my daughter's bed in the hospital with the baby in her arms. I was totally drunk. I then went to Sister Ada, a Catholic nun in California, for rehab, but she turned me away because I insisted that I could drink socially. Again, total denial. Next was a very posh 28-day luxury rehab called Sober Living in Malibu, who took my family's money and didn't cure me. I didn't want to be cured. And also, I wasn't ready. An alcoholic must be ready. It must be inside of them to want to quit. So I immediately relapsed again at the airport on the way home. Christmas 2006, I finally sank to my lowest inner self. My unwashed hair in tangles, I looked like a street woman whose soul had gone somewhere else. I knew that deep in my heart, I needed help, but I didn't know how to ask for it. I was sad. It was beyond sadness. I was loath to admit that I was an alcoholic. Why should I? We celebrated Christmas with our children in Middlebury. I ruined the third Christmas in a row. My children took me aside one by one, and I will never forget the look in their eyes. They said, "Please, please, Mommy, please." It just makes me cry when I think about it. "Please, please get some help. We don't want you to die." And they tell me it's the gift of desperation. I didn't know desperation was a gift. That made me realize that I had to go to long-term treatment until I was completely well. So I went back to Willingway Hospital. They opened their arms to me. I wasn't very happy to be there, but I knew that I had to get well, do or die. So I was at the women's residence for almost 16 months, in outpatient treatment a little bit before that. It was the most difficult thing I ever had to do in my entire life. I was away from my family. I barely saw them. It was like living in a women's prison. I just have no other description for it. But I was determined to get well, to stick to it, and I did. And it was horrible. And now, when I look back at it all, it's just hard to believe. It was at Palm Springs, at the Betty Ford Center, Maple Leaf Farm, sober living in Malibu, 2 stays at Willingway Hospital. The consequences of this disease have been devastating for me and my family. For 3 years, I was a non-person. I wasn't able to be a wife, a mother, or a grandmother. My alcoholism had a devastating effect on my marriage, and some of the consequences I am living through today. But I have a gratitude list. It is big as a sky, you know, and I just smile and have an inner joy when I think about it. I am alive. I have a wonderful husband that waited for me, tried to help me, and had faith in me. And I have the most wonderful family any human being could ever ask for. I also learned about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it opened up a new way of life for me. And God came back into my life. I love sunshine. I love colors and trees and rainfall and smiles. I love to paint. I love to play the piano. And above all, I so dearly love my family. And I see my 2 daughters up there. I could just... I can't begin to tell you what it's like just to have them come and support me today. Anyway, I have to calm down for a minute. I'm really one of the lucky ones. So lucky. Lots of alcoholics just don't make it. I really do believe that alcoholism needs to be understood and talked about openly. I know that many of us have alcoholism in our family and we can't cope. We need to learn how to cope with people like me. I believe private initiatives are